get football season back underway. I know maybe that was just me saying that, but Hank pointed out football sweatshirt today. So thanks so much for joining me, Hank. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you just about business and about some of your experiences that you've had. So again, I appreciate you joining me on the Growth Secrets interview series.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, do me a favor and just give us a little bit of a background. Give us your background. What got you into business and what are you working on today?
Sure. Well, as I was explaining to you, Reed, my career has been somewhat long, and maybe I should be embarrassed admitting this, but I got out of school when Jimmy Carter was still president. So my early experience was in business was actually a tough economy. I think we're getting ready to have one again, but it was a different set of problems back then. But early 80s was a recessionary time. And back in those days, I was doing a lot of construction, real estate related stuff. And I ended up going back. It was a terrible economy, which drove me back to graduate school. So I ended up getting an MBA, and I got interested. I wanted to get in management consulting. And, I really didn't know a whole lot about it, but a professor guided me into it and really kind of influenced me. And make a long story short, I found this firm that was based in Raleigh, North Carolina, that specialized in the construction industry. At the time was relatively small entrepreneurial firm. And I joined it, and it fit me, and I guess I fit them. And it ended up becoming my career. And I still have a shingle hung with that firm. I still have a chairman title. I do some things with that firm. I also do some things with a local law firm here in Wilmington, North Carolina, where I live. So I've got a foot in both those camps, still doing some consulting. I sit on about 5 different company boards of directors, and confine most of my consulting these days to things that don't put me on an airplane. But I spent 35 years almost living on an airplane, and decided enough was enough. So I love what I do. I love to consult. I love to work, but I don't want to be on airplanes all the time anymore. And so I've kind of crafted my world accordingly.
Well, it is a good time, I guess, to have that desire. As everybody knows at this point, the world has been shut down from a travel standpoint and from a normal everyday interaction standpoint. This is a topic that I wanted to talk about with you anyway. I hadn't planned on starting here, but since you mentioned that, how has your business adapted, and the businesses that you serve, how have they been adapting to this post-pandemic world that we're living in right now, with so many people being forced to either work from home or given the opportunity to work from home, depending on how you want to look at that. So I'm curious to see, I've been asking a lot of our guests this, how have you guys been adapting?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. The businesses, my business and my client's business, in terms of how they're going to fare and are faring, are quite different. Because I'm in a service business just like you are, and our business, the kind of business we're in, you never really have a big tail on the backlog. But my clients' businesses are big, in some cases, largest construction companies in the country. And they have, projects that are sometimes 2 or 3 years or more in duration. Those kinds of companies tend to have what you call a large backlog of work. And so typically they will see tough economic times coming. What'll cost them right now will be projects that get shut down or stopped because of the virus. But short of that, most of them are keeping things going, at least within reason. Some of them are keeping things going to the point where they don't even feel the effects. And they'll feel it a couple of years from now, after they burn that backlog off and, find themselves in a tougher market and so on. It's the way that business works. But the businesses are adapting, according to whatever those economics are. My business, as an example, will probably do 60% in 2020 what it did in 2019. So it's, it's having to adjust size, it's having to furlough people. And even in doing all that, it'll probably still, stay in the black, but maybe just barely, so it won't do well. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, but it's been surprising to me anyway. I find that this working from home thing has barely phased anybody. I mean, it's everybody I talk to is kind of going, well, we figured that out the first day, and so like everybody's kind of used to it, and it'll be interesting to see what effect that has on the world after things have settled down and normalized a bit. I'm not sure I'd want to be in the business of building office buildings anytime soon, just as an example. So it'll be an interesting long-term, see how that long-term effect plays out. But I find that the working virtually thing, everybody seems to have adapted to that. Unfortunately, it just depends on your business as to how much of your business requires high touch with people to get things going, in terms of the effect that it might have.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so that's a really good point, right? And I've noticed that too. I've noticed that a lot of my clients, I'll be the first to admit that the first week of all this, I was pretty nervous, right? I mean, I have client work that I'm responsible for, and I do marketing consulting, and I've got client projects. We had spent months developing their 2020 strategies, and I felt like those were out the window. So what were my clients going to do once the initial shock of what was really happening blew over? I started to have these conversations with clients, and they were saying, you know what, it took us about a day or two to adapt to have the companies be able to work remotely. We set up Zoom, we set up Slack, we set up some project management tools that can be done in the cloud and Google Drive and all that kind of stuff. A lot of it was already done. And of course, with my clients, we're already doing things like digital marketing. Their campaigns were done mostly virtually anyway. So once that initial shock wore off, it was like, okay, well, let's figure out what we can do now, right? Let's figure out how to keep going with minimal disruption. So it was a little bit of a wipe the sweat off the brow moment. And my what's got me curious is, what is it going to look like when we get back to normal? And a lot of employer conversations are centered around, okay, how did that remote work stretch? How'd that play out? How'd that work for you? It worked fine for me. Is there a reason to change it back completely? And I do think that there's going to be a large percentage of the workforce that just continues to work from home and continues to work remotely. It's going to be justified, and so that for the last 3 months we've been having our regular meetings virtually, and they have started on time and they've ended on time, and there was no traveling, and I to drive or to get back home. So let's go back to the thing that took a whole lot more time, was a lot less productive. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to have a permanent effect. But if you think about it, things tend to wax and wane over time. They go up and down, and what'll happen, I believe, is for the next 5, maybe even 10 years, exactly what you described will sort of carry the day. But at some point, I believe human beings are social animals, and the other thing is, if you're running a business, you can't really create a culture that I think as a CEO that you want to create and reinforce it unless there's a certain amount of human interaction. And what that amount is, that's an open question. But I think, people do like to socialize, and work. What I feel, especially at my age, even more than I used to feel, is that, a big part of what we take out of our work is what we do with and for other people. And so in order to take that out of your work, I think you do have to have some interaction with them, other than through a video screen or a telephone line. That's just my opinion. I think, but I do think it's going to have a permanent effect, and it probably will never come back to quite what it was. But on the other hand, I don't know that that's a surprise either, because it's been, if you think about mobile technology starting to enable this 20 years ago, and if you look at the cost of leases in big cities like New York, Chicago, LA, whatever, I mean, the office leases, the prices are ridiculous. And people have already been, hoteling office space. I mean, the big consulting firms, we never did it, but the big firms all hotel, and share space. And, the workspace of today looks nothing like the workspace that existed when I was probably your age. So all these things will evolve, and I don't think it's anything new that less bricks and less brick and mortar is going to be a permanent thing. But at the same time, I think it'll always come back to some human touch that's required in business.
Yeah, I mean, that's my preference. Even if, as a quote unquote millennial, right? I think a lot of the preconceived notions about my generation are silly anyway. But I really appreciate and frankly, yes, be able to get in front of my call. And now, certainly am looking forward to a time when we can all be back in one room again. So I agree with you. I do think there's definitely not going to stay at the extreme it is now. I think we're going to see a new balance that looks different than it did before, but now, which I think will be positive a little bit, because I want to learn a little bit more about the businesses that you work with. And you can pick your core business, or you can pick a business that you're most passionate about. But one of the things we always like to ask is, what is the problem that you solve better than anybody else? Or what is that core problem that you solve that your clients pay you money for? And what can identify that and describe that?
Sure. And Reed, I'm getting a little bit of audio difficulty, but hopefully you're hearing me okay.
Yep, you're good on my side. Can you hear me just fine?
Yeah, that's better. But to answer your question, so I ended up becoming the head of this firm for quite a long time. And we, today probably had, it's down now, but we probably were pushing 200 people altogether. So we were organized by different practice areas, and we took those practice areas into a singular industry. So the value proposition of dealing with us was, we knew that industry and we knew that business, and we defined it very broadly. But I would say probably a lot of our clients were some form of contracting company. So they were people that create large, typically larger pieces of infrastructure, larger buildings in cities, things like that. And they typically have to be big companies, big enough to have the kind of problems that consultants deal with. So we were organized in various disciplines in terms of what we did. If I had to boil it down, what did we really help them do, one way or the other, was to be more profitable and create companies that were more valuable. So it was either managing to increase their earnings stream or to mitigate their risk profile. And both of those two things will ultimately increase value in those companies.
I gotcha. And then, where are you getting customers from? What's the process? Again, this is the Growth Secrets interview series. So we like to hear about what the growth strategy is, what the process is for growth. How are you getting new business? What's the process from they've never heard of you before to they're a paying customer?
Yeah. so good question. We had, so when I first started out, we were not nearly as well known as we are now in our world, you know? And so back then, you know, it was typical, it was marketing 101 to reinforce the brand and a very specific value proposition. You know, we didn't want to consult for a manufacturer, and we didn't want to consult for a healthcare provider. You know, we focused just on that industry, and we kind of became industry gurus. And so the marketing was all oriented toward that. And so step one was use marketing to get your name out and to reinforce your brand, and the fact that you brought something to the table that was not what they could get from anybody else. And that also happened to be, you know, you also have to deliver that. So we had people who really knew the space, really knew what they were talking about, understood the client base. You know, I mean, we focused. It was a very focused strategy. And then to actually take, you know, the next step, I mean, marketing, one definition of marketing is stuff you do so you don't have to sell so hard. But eventually you got to get business, right? You have to get somebody to say, we actually want to use you. And so really a lot of our individual business development really took place at the, especially back in those days, it took place very much one-on-one. Back in those days, we had what I would call a seller-doer strategy. We were like, you know, we probably had, I don't know, 60, 70 billable people back then. And every single one of them operated kind of like Alan Weiss would describe, you know, so they were very individualistic. They were responsible either as an individual or as a very small team, 2 or 3 people max, that would go out and see clients. You know, somebody go, I mean, I used to go to Atlanta, a good example, you know, fly to Atlanta, stay there 2 days, have 10, 12 client meetings, you know, drive around that perimeter and all that traffic and see people and kiss babies and shake hands and get to know people. And, you know, we also did a lot of things like you probably talked to Mr. Weiss about, but we used to do a lot of seminars, which were a big, you know, way to showcase kind of what you knew. That business model probably is a little bit not, I would say maybe a little bit obsolete by today's standards, but we got known with associations. We would do a lot of public speaking. So, you know, we did anything we could to put ourselves in front of the client base. We put a lot of premium on marketing, but we also understood that, you know, ultimately it's a contact sport and you got to get out there one-on-one and bring the business in.
I like that. And I agree that, one, I love the definition of marketing. It's stuff you do so you don't have to sell so hard. That's, I would definitely steal that between me and you. No one else is watching right now. And if you guys are watching, don't tell anybody. I'm stealing that. I like that, but I am also in agreement that you have to be able, you cannot expect that your marketing will completely sell the product for you, right? Or especially if you're in a service business, you have to be able to interact with people. You've got to be able to communicate. You've got to be able to persuade. And if possible, I know that I like to get in front of people physically, you know, in a room, and I like to talk to people. I find that my ability to close business is probably stronger that way. There's an argument to be had about efficiency versus you know, in terms of the calls that I can take by doing it all virtually versus being able to close at a higher rate by doing it in person. There's a discussion to be had about that. But I do think it comes down to figuring out what those numbers are, figuring out what the metrics tell you and what your skills. And frankly, and this is another thing that Alan Weiss and guys, if you're listening to this and you didn't watch the interview with Alan Weiss, definitely go check it out. I'll link to it in the comments. What he would agree with is that you also got to think about what kind of business you want to be in. What kind of lifestyle do you want to have when it comes to the type of work that you do? I know a lot of people that are perfectly capable and willing and will accommodate for virtual meetings and things like that, but they would just prefer, because their life is better if they get to talk business over lunch, right? Instead of just over the phone or just sitting in front of a computer. And I've got no gripes with that whatsoever. So there's a balance to be had.
Absolutely. And I know your focus is on growth strategies. And I think you just said something that's really important, which is you have to decide whether you really want to grow or not. I mean, there's really nothing wrong with saying, I just want to be a sole practitioner, make a great living, and have a lot of time to, smell the roses and walk my dog or whatever you like to do. And, you can do that and just do your own thing, or you could even stay small. I mean, we committed to growth, and we were in a business that was very difficult to grow. It was very difficult to scale. It was not like the big consultants that you read about, the McKinseys of the world and so forth. We were kind of a smaller niche firm, and it took too much wisdom about what was going on to have the kind of turnover that a McKinsey or a Bain or an Accenture would have. So we had to have people that wanted to stay, wanted to do it as a career. And that's a good thing, but it makes it tough to scale a business like that. But over time we did. But it didn't occur without an extreme dedication to make it occur. And I bought a lot of small consulting firms, firms that were 5-10 people, folded them into our enterprise, talked to 1 million of them, over my career. And what'll keep you small is the idea that, well, I don't want to put people on my payroll, so I'll just get a few stringers and I'll give them 1099, statements when they do work for me. And that's very seductive, because when times get tough, like they're getting ready to get right now, you don't have to deal with payroll obligations, and it keeps you small and nimble and flexible. But the point is, it keeps you small because you never really commit to it. And what we found is, if you kind of, the metaphor about burning the boats on the beach, you got to commit to some people. You're going to keep them busy. You obviously don't want to overcommit, but you have to put that in front of you, and you have to get everybody on board with the fact that we're going to spend some money that we could otherwise stick in our W-2 statements to get somewhere down the road. And that can be tough. I mean, I had partners over the years who really didn't want to do that when it came right down to it. They were like, we just as soon march in place, maximize every dollar of income we have, and forget about what things are going to be like 2 years or 3 years or 5 years down the road. But we had to get past that. And today, that's, we're the, not a big firm when you compare to the large ones, but for a firm that does what we do, a couple hundred people, billing out what we bill revenue-wise, we really built a hell of a machine. And we are not, we're kind of famous in our world. So when my firm goes into a target client these days, it is much more advantage than it was when I came along, because it's just so well known.
Mm-hmm. So you said a couple of things there that I really want to key in on, and I'd like folks, if you're watching this, to really pay attention to this idea. Hank, what you said was you're really talking about vision and executing on that vision, right? If you want to stay small, by all means, stay small. That's fine. But don't make an excuse for your lack of growth and just claim that it's because you want to stay small, or your lack of business structure and your lack of process, and just say, well, we want to stay small because we haven't actually done the things that are required to grow, so we're not growing, so we just want to stay small, or I don't want to go through the effort of growing the business, right? If you want to stay small, then again, that's fine, but you have to own that. Now, if you want to commit to growth, you've got to commit to it and build the systems and build the processes and do the things that you need to actually grow a business beyond yourself, for one, but also one that can live on without you, because that's a business that not only can scale, but that can sell. You mentioned that you've bought several businesses over the years, and I imagine that a component of the decision making was, is this business totally lose its value if we buy out the founder and they go off and sit on the beach, right? Or do we have to have this one person, right? So just thinking about what you want your business to look like in 5, 10, 20 years, and then putting together a plan and then executing on that plan is what's important here. It's not really important how big or grand or small that plan is. Is that fair? I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's very well said. It's basically, you have to kind of look in the mirror and be honest with yourself about what you want, because otherwise you'll be trying to execute on something that maybe at a gut level you really don't want. And you're always going to be better served if your execution is aligned with what you really value and what you really see as a vision that's right for you, as a business owner.
Well, that I think is the nugget, guys. If you're going to take away one thing from that, it's really get clear. I think especially entrepreneurs and especially business leaders, they tend to get stuck in running through the motions, and you set these annual goals of, we're going to grow by 10% because I guess that's what you should do, right? We want to set high goals, but we don't want to really. I feel like the 10% growth number or the 20% growth number is code for, we want to grow. We have to say we want to grow, but we don't actually want to do the things that would make growth happen. I feel like I walk into these discussions with executive teams and ask them what's the goal for 2020 or what's the goal for the year, and they say, well, 10% growth. And it's like, okay, tell me why.
Yeah.
And what do you plan to do different from last year's growth rate was less than that, right? What are you going to do different from last year? And if there's no clear answer, then I know they're not serious about this. They just would like to see growth. Sure, we all would like to, I guess, if it would just happen to us. But what are you actually going to do to make that happen?
Well, that's right. And I think a lot of times, what I found with CEOs, most CEOs, especially if they're pretty sharp, most of them are very sharp people, and they may know intuitively that they're either at a crossroads themselves, or they're having trouble getting their team to go down the path that they think is right for the organization. And so a lot of times your role as the outsider is to be that sand in the oyster that sort of comes in and asks those hard questions. Mm-hmm. And is also the honest broker who can, in a nice way, the key to our business like yours and mine, being an advisor, is you have to tell people what they don't want to hear, but in a way that doesn't get you fired.
Right.
The first day you show up. So
yeah.
you have to be kind of a trusted advisor to them, but you have to challenge them and you have to ask those hard questions, and you actually have to disagree with them. And they won't really respect you if you don't, because down deep, that's what they're paying you for. If they just wanted to hear the same old stuff, they could go and they could listen to their own, read their own press clippings and listen to what their people have to say. They didn't bring you in for that. They brought you in for something different.
Yeah, that's a lesson I learned early on in business, was that, and I wish there was a way to have learned this lesson faster, because I took on a lot of clients that I probably shouldn't have, right? And I took on some business that now looking back, I wouldn't set foot in that office, because and I liken it to that of like a doctor, right? If you walk into a doctor's office and you say, "Doc, I'm having chest pains. I think I need open heart surgery."